The crystal wine glasses clinked as Margaret Chen topped off everyone's drink, her perfect hostess smile never wavering. The monthly family dinner at the Chen mansion was a carefully orchestrated show of wealth and status, where every detail had to be just right. Even the way she looked down her nose at me, her son's wife of 3 years, was perfectly calculated. "So, Emily," she said, swirling her wine with practiced elegance, still teaching at that community college. I dabbed my napkin against my lips before responding. "Actually, I'm a full professor now at State University. Just got tenure last month." "Oh, how quaint." Margaret exchanged knowing looks with her husband Richard, the CEO of Pacific Regional Bank. "Though I suppose someone has to teach the basics to undergraduates." My husband James squeezed my hand under the table. He knew how these dinners went, the subtle digs, the barely concealed contempt for my chosen profession. To the Chen family, success meant only one thing: banking. "Emily teaches graduate-level economics and monetary policy," James defended, though we both knew it wouldn't help. Richard Chen chuckled, cutting into his perfectly cooked Wagyu steak. "Monetary policy? In a classroom? That's like learning to swim by reading a book. Real banking, real money. That's where you learn how the economy actually works." I caught my sister-in-law Jessica's smirk from across the table. As Pacific Regional's newly appointed Vice President of Investment Strategy, she never missed a chance to reinforce her superior position in the family hierarchy. Speaking of real banking, Jessica chimed in, "Daddy, should we tell them about the new acquisition?" Richard's chest puffed up with pride. Pacific Regional just acquired Midwest Trust. Added another $50 billion to our portfolio. Now that's what I call practical economics. "How wonderful," I said softly, taking a sip of wine to hide my expression. I'd seen the preliminary reports on that acquisition, but they didn't need to know that. Not yet. "You know, Emily," Margaret leaned forward with fake concern. "James mentioned you've been working late recently. If you're finding teaching too demanding, I'm sure Richard could find something suitable for you at the bank. Entry level, of course." James started to protest, but I placed my hand on his arm. "That's very thoughtful, Margaret, but I'm actually quite busy with some research for the Federal Reserve." "The Federal Reserve?" Jessica laughed out loud. "Grading papers for them too." I smiled and turned the conversation to safer topics. Jessica's recent vacation in the Maldives, Richard's new yacht, Margaret's charity gala. Let them talk. Let them assume. They had no idea who really sat at their table. Later that night, as James and I drove home to our modest suburban house, a constant source of disapproval from his family, he apologized again for their behavior. "I'm so sorry, They just can't see past their own world." "It's fine," I assured him, checking my phone as another confidential email came in. "Sometimes it's better if people underestimate you." "Still," he sighed, "I wish they could see how brilliant you are. The research you do, the impact you have." I squeezed his hand. James was the only one who knew the full scope of my work, and even he didn't know everything about the report I was finalizing. Back home, in my study, I opened my laptop and returned to the document I'd been working on for the past 6 months. The official letterhead read, "Federal Reserve Special Committee on Banking Stability and Risk Assessment." As lead analyst and committee chair, I'd been investigating systemic risks in regional banking systems. What had started as a routine review had uncovered something far more concerning, particularly in certain aggressive West Coast institutions. My phone buzzed, a secure message from Marcus Wong at the Treasury Department. "Dr. Harrison, preliminary findings confirmed. Pacific Regional's exposure worse than initially suspected. Full review needed ASAP." I typed back, "Agreed. Preparing final report now. Meeting still scheduled for Monday." "Yes, 9 a.m. Full oversight committee attendance required." I sat back, thinking about Richard Chen's smug announcement of the Midwest Trust acquisition. He had no idea that the bank he just bought was a house of cards, its assets grossly overvalued, combined with Pacific Regional's already precarious leverage ratios. Another message came in, this time from Sarah Martinez at the SEC. "Found those irregularities you flagged in the PR Midwest deal. How soon can you review?" "Sending secure link now," I replied. "Focus on section 7.4, the derivative exposure calculations." I worked late into the night, fine-tuning my analysis. Every number had to be perfect, every conclusion ironclad. Because on Monday morning, I would walk into the Federal Reserve's regional headquarters not as Emily Harrison, the simple professor. The Chens dismissed so easily, but as Dr. Emily Harrison, the nation's leading expert on banking system stability. And I would present evidence that their precious Pacific Regional Bank was about to become the biggest banking crisis since 2008. I thought about Margaret's condescending smile, Jessica's mocking laughter, Richard's dismissal of my theoretical knowledge. They thought teaching economics meant I couldn't understand real banking. They were about to learn how theory and practice could collide in devastating ways. My phone buzzed one final time, the Fed chairman's office confirming Monday's emergency session. I sent a quick acknowledgement, then closed my laptop. James was already asleep when I came to bed. As I lay there in the darkness, I couldn't help but wonder how the Chens would react when they realized that the professor they'd looked down on for so long was about to decide their bank's fate. But this wasn't about revenge. This was about protecting the financial system from exactly the kind of reckless behavior Richard Chen had practiced for years. Believing his bank was too important to fail, his position too powerful to challenge. Monday would change everything. And somewhere deep inside, a small human part of me looked forward to seeing their faces when they realized who really understood real banking after all. I drifted off to sleep, mentally rehearsing my presentation. In less than 48 hours, the Chens would learn that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one they never bothered to take seriously. And sometimes the best revenge isn't fighting back. It's simply doing your job so well that your enemies destroy themselves. Monday morning dawned clear and crisp. I arrived at the Federal Reserve's regional headquarters at 7:30 a.m., well before the 9 a.m. emergency session. The security guard nodded respectfully as I passed through. No need to check my credentials. As committee chair, I've been practically living here for the past 6 months. Dr. Harrison, Marcus Wong from Treasury, greeted me in the conference room, already reviewing documents. Final numbers came in from the SEC overnight. It's worse than we thought. I nodded, setting up my laptop. Pacific Regional's leverage ratio? Nearly double what they reported. The Midwest Trust acquisition was just smoke and mirrors. Sarah Martinez from the SEC joined us, carrying a thick folder. We found evidence of systematic misrepresentation in their risk assessments. Dr. Harrison, your model predicting their vulnerability was spot on. I pulled up my presentation as other committee members filed in. Representatives from the FDIC, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, state banking regulators. At 8:45, my phone buzzed with a text from James. Dad just got an urgent call. Heading to Bank HQ. Everything okay? I replied simply, turn on CNBC in about an hour. At precisely 9 a.m., the doors opened and Richard Chen strode in, flanked by his executive team and lawyers. The confidence drained from his face as he saw me sitting at the head of the conference table. Emily? What are you? This must be a mistake. No mistake, Mr. Chen, I said calmly. Please, take a seat. We have a lot to discuss. I was told this was a Federal Reserve Oversight Committee meeting, he blustered. Where is Chairman Williams? Chairman Williams is joining virtually. I gestured to the large screen where several faces were already connected. As committee chair, I'll be leading today's session. Richard's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally dawning horror as he realized the truth. The simple professor he'd dismissed for years was about to decide his bank's fate. For those just joining, I began, my voice steady. I'm Dr. Emily Harrison, chair of the Federal Reserve Special Committee on Banking Stability and Risk Assessment. We're here to address serious concerns about Pacific Regional Bank's stability, particularly in light of the recent Midwest Trust acquisition. The first slide appeared, a complex network diagram showing Pacific Regional's risk exposure. I'd simplified it considerably from my academic work, but it still drew gasps from the room. Over the past 6 months, our investigation has uncovered a pattern of increasingly risky behavior. I continued. Pacific Regional's actual leverage ratio is 38% higher than reported, largely due to hidden exposure in derivatives markets. Richard's lawyer tried to interject, but I held up my hand. Please hold questions. We have a lot to cover. For the next hour, I methodically laid out everything we'd found. The creative accounting that hid true risk levels. The Midwest Trust acquisition that was supposed to shore up their balance sheet but actually made things worse. The derivatives trades that could trigger a cascade of failures across multiple institutions. In conclusion, I said, changing to the final slide, Pacific Regional's current position represents an unacceptable risk to the banking system. This committee recommends immediate regulatory intervention, including temporary suspension of trading in PR stock, restructuring of the executive team, and a detailed audit of all positions. Richard finally found his voice. This is absurd. You can't. You're just a professor. Dr. Harrison, Chairman Williams spoke from the screen, is one of our most respected banking systems experts. Her models predicting the 2008 crisis are now standard teaching tools at Harvard Business School. Perhaps if you'd attended any of her lectures at the Fed's annual banking symposium, you'd know that. My phone was buzzing constantly now. News of Pacific Regional's trading suspension had hit the markets. James sent another text. Mom and Jessica watching CNBC. Your name just came up as Fed committee chair. Mom dropped her coffee cup. The next few hours were a blur of technical discussions, legal negotiations, and increasingly desperate attempts by Richard's team to avoid the inevitable. By late afternoon, Pacific Regional stock had dropped 60%. Richard had been suspended as CEO, and federal regulators were installing an interim management team. I packed up my materials as the room slowly emptied, regulators and lawyers breaking into smaller groups to handle various aspects of the intervention. Richard remained seated, staring blankly at the table. Why didn't you tell us? He asked finally. All those dinners, all those times would it have mattered? I replied quietly. Would you have listened to my concerns about your risk management if I had? He had no answer. That evening, I arrived home to find James waiting with a glass of wine and a proud smile. You were amazing, he said, pulling up video clips of various financial news channels discussing the dramatic intervention led by banking expert Dr. Emily Harrison. How's your family taking it? He laughed. Mom called 5 times, trying to explain that she always knew you were smart and just wanted to push you to reach your potential. Jessica hasn't said a word, but she took down all her social media posts about being VP at PR. I sighed, kicking off my heels. You know, this isn't how I wanted things to play out. The bank's problems were real. They needed to be addressed. I know, he said softly. That's what makes it even better. You didn't do this for revenge. You did it because it was right. My phone buzzed again. A message from Sarah at the SEC. Preliminary audit findings even worse than expected. Good call on pushing for immediate intervention. Over the next few weeks, the full story of Pacific Regional's problems emerged. Financial papers wrote detailed articles about how a brilliant academic had spotted systemic risks that traditional bank examiners missed. Harvard Business Review requested an article about my analytical methods. 3 major banks hired consulting firms to implement my risk assessment models. The monthly family dinner was, unsurprisingly, canceled. But 2 weeks after the intervention, Margaret Chen appeared at my university office. She stood awkwardly, taking in the academic awards, the published papers, the photos of me with various Federal Reserve governors. She started, then tried again. I'm sorry, Emily. We were wrong about you, about so many things. I gestured for her to sit. Banking isn't just about making deals, Margaret. It's about understanding systems, seeing patterns, managing risk. That's what I teach. That's what I research. Richard always said academic knowledge didn't matter in real banking, she said quietly. Now he's banned from the industry and you're advising the Fed chairman. I leaned forward. Would you like to know what I'm working on now? She looked up, surprised. New models for community banking. Ways to make smaller banks more stable, more competitive. Because banking shouldn't just be about big profits and bigger risks. It should be about serving communities, building sustainable growth. Could you tell me more? For the next hour, I explained my ideas about reforming regional banking. To my surprise, Margaret asked intelligent questions, showing genuine interest. By the end, something had shifted between us. You know, she said as she stood to leave, we're trying to restart the family dinners. At a slightly smaller house now, of course. Would you and James come? I smiled. I'd like that. Though maybe less talk about banking this time? She actually laughed. Definitely less banking talk. 1 year later, I sat in my office at the Federal Reserve, where I now split my time with teaching. A frame on the wall held the Harvard Business Review cover story. The professor who saw it coming. How academic rigor is reshaping banking oversight. My phone buzzed, James reminding me about dinner with his family. These days, the conversations were different. Jessica had found her calling running the microlending nonprofit. Richard, humble but wiser, was teaching business ethics at a local college. And Margaret had become one of my strongest supporters in promoting financial literacy education. As I packed up to leave, I thought about what I told my graduate students in our first class each semester. Banking isn't about power or status. It's about understanding how money flows through systems, how those systems affect real people's lives. Sometimes the most valuable insights come from studying the theory, not just chasing the practice. They listen more attentively now that the Pacific Regional case study is part of the standard curriculum. Walking to my car, I passed a group of students discussing my latest research paper. One of them noticed me and nudged the others. They quickly fell silent, watching me with a mix of awe and nervousness. I smiled, remembering how it felt to be underestimated. "Don't let me interrupt," I said. "Though if you're discussing the section on derivative exposure calculations, I'd be happy to explain my methodology." Their faces lit up, and soon we were deep in discussion about financial system dynamics. Because that's the real lesson in all of this. True expertise isn't about titles or power or family connections. It's about understanding, about seeing the patterns others miss, and about using that knowledge to make things better. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right in ways that help everyone, even those who never believed in you in the first place. That's not just a lesson in banking, that's a lesson in life. I still remember the day my entire world shattered. It was a crisp autumn evening, and I stood in our living room clutching my art school acceptance letter while my father's face turned an alarming shade of red. Art school. His voice dripped with disgust as he stared at the envelope in my hands. "After all we've done to secure your place at Harvard Law?" I was 22, fresh out of undergrad with a double major in fine arts and business, a compromise I'd made to appease my parents while pursuing my passion. But now, standing in our meticulously decorated living room that felt more like a courthouse, I knew the real battle was just beginning. "Dad, please," I pleaded, trying to keep my voice steady. "The Florence Academy of Art, it's one of the most prestigious art schools in the world. They only accept 12 students per year." My mother sat perched on the edge of our leather sofa, her perfectly manicured hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. "Sophia," she said, using my full name instead of the usual Sophie, "we didn't spend a fortune on your education for you to throw it all away on paintings." The way she said paintings like it was something dirty, something beneath us, made my heart ache. On the walls around us hung expensive artwork my parents had collected over the years, not because they appreciated the artistry, but because each piece was a sound investment. "I'm not throwing anything away," I insisted. "I can make a living as an artist. I've already sold 3 pieces at the senior showcase." "For what?" My father interrupted, his voice rising. "A few $100s. That wouldn't even cover a week's worth of groceries." He strode to his desk and pulled out a thick envelope, my Harvard Law acceptance letter. He'd been carrying it around for weeks, showing it to everyone who would listen. "This," he waved it in front of my face. "This is your future, not some fantasy about becoming an artist." I took a deep breath, gathering every ounce of courage I possessed. "I'm going to Florence." The silence that followed was deafening. My father's face went from red to purple, and my mother's sharp intake of breath cut through the room like a knife. "If you choose this," my father's voice was dangerously quiet, "you choose it without our support. No money, no connections, nothing." "Richard," my mother gasped, but he held up his hand. "No, Catherine. She needs to understand the consequences of her choices." He turned back to me. "You have until tomorrow morning to make your decision. Harvard Law and your family, or this artistic delusion and nothing else." I didn't need until morning. "I choose art." The words left my mouth before I could second-guess them. My mother burst into tears, and my father's expression hardened into something I'd never seen before. "Then pack your things," he said coldly. "You have an hour. After that, you're no longer welcome in this house." That night, I left with 2 suitcases, one filled with clothes, the other with my art supplies. My childhood bedroom, once a sanctuary filled with easels and half-finished canvases, now felt like a museum of abandoned dreams. As I packed, I could hear my mother sobbing downstairs and my father's heavy footsteps pacing the hallway. My younger sister, Lily, slipped into my room as I was zipping up the last suitcase. Her eyes were red from crying. "Where will you go?" she whispered. "I have some money saved," I assured her, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "And Marie said I can stay with her until I figure things out." Marie, my best friend since high school, was the only person who had consistently supported my artistic dreams. She was already in New York, working as a graphic designer and sharing a tiny apartment with 2 other girls. Lily hugged me tightly. "They'll come around," she said, but we both knew it was a lie. The Blackwoods never came around. They either got their way or they cut their losses. As I walked out of my childhood home that night, my father didn't even look up from his newspaper. My mother stood by the stairs, tears streaming down her face, but she made no move to stop me or say goodbye. The heavy wooden door closed behind me with a final thud, and just like that, I was on my own. The next few months were a blur of exhaustion and determination. I moved in with Marie in New York, sleeping on her couch and working 3 jobs while preparing for my move to Florence. During the day, I worked as a barista at an upscale coffee shop. In the evenings, I taught art classes at a community center, and on weekends, I did face painting at children's parties. Every spare moment was spent painting, improving my portfolio, and learning Italian through online courses. My parents' words echoed in my head every time I felt like giving up. "You'll be a failure. Artists don't make real money. You're throwing your life away." But instead of breaking me, their doubt fueled me. Each criticism became a brushstroke, each dismissal a new layer of paint. 6 months later, I boarded a plane to Florence with everything I owned packed into 3 suitcases. The money I'd saved barely covered my first semester's tuition and a tiny room in a shared apartment, but I was doing it. I was actually doing it. Florence was everything I dreamed of and more. The city itself was art. Every building, every street corner, every sunset over the Arno River seemed to whisper centuries of artistic inspiration. At the academy, I threw myself into my studies with a passion that surprised even me. While other students complained about the grueling schedule and demanding professors, I thrived on it. Professor Alessandro Rossi, my primary instructor, became not just a mentor but a champion of my work. He saw something in my paintings that even I hadn't recognized, a raw emotion, a depth of feeling that came from somewhere deep within. "Your pain," he told me one day as we studied one of my pieces, "it bleeds through the canvas. But so does your strength. This is not just technique, Sophia. This is truth." The truth he spoke of was evident in every piece I created. My first major work at the Academy was a large-scale oil painting titled The Disowned. It showed a young woman standing in a darkened doorway, her shadow stretching behind her into a warm, well-lit room she could no longer enter. The critics called it hauntingly beautiful and a masterpiece of modern realism. When it sold for €15,000 at the Academy's Winter Showcase, I felt a surge of vindication. It wasn't the millions my father dealt with in his law practice, but it was more than a few $100s. I used the money to secure my next semester's tuition and bought my first proper set of professional oil paints. But it was my series, Echoes of Rejection, that would change everything. Over the course of a year, I created 12 large-scale paintings, each one capturing a moment of personal rejection transformed into something beautiful. The centerpiece was a massive canvas titled The Last Supper of the Disowned, a modern take on Da Vinci's masterpiece, but with empty chairs and abandoned place settings, the family table becoming a symbol of exclusion rather than communion. Professor Rossi was instrumental in getting the series exhibited at a prestigious gallery in Florence. Opening night, I stood in my black dress, purchased secondhand, watching as critics and collectors moved from piece to piece, their whispers growing more excited with each painting. By midnight, 9 of the 12 paintings had sold for prices that made my head spin. The Last Supper alone went for €200,000 to a prominent Italian collector. As I stood there, champagne glass shaking in my hand, Professor Rossi approached with a smile. "You see, Sophia, sometimes the very people who try to extinguish our fire only end up fueling it instead." That night, as I sat alone in my small apartment counting the zeros on the check, I thought about calling my parents. Surely now they would understand. Surely this success would prove them wrong. But I didn't call. Instead, I took that money and rented a proper studio, bought the highest quality materials I could find, and threw myself into creating more art. The pain of the rejection had become my greatest asset. I wasn't ready to let go of that yet. Little did I know, my success in Florence was just the beginning. The real test would come 3 years later, when my name would echo through the halls of New York's most prestigious galleries, and the art world would learn just how wrong my parents had been about their daughter's artistic delusion. 3 years after my breakthrough in Florence, I stood in my New York studio, staring at my latest creation, a massive triptych titled Genesis of Abandonment. The piece had taken me 8 months to complete, each panel measuring 6 feet by 4 feet, telling the story of familial rejection through abstract symbolism and haunting realism. I'd returned to New York not because I missed home, but because conquering the American art scene was the ultimate proof of success. Florence had given me the foundation, but New York would give me vindication. My new gallery show was opening in 2 days at the prestigious Morgan Gallery in Chelsea. Victoria Morgan herself had discovered my work during a trip to Italy and practically begged to represent me in New York. The exhibition would feature 20 of my pieces, including the triptych, which was already generating buzz in the art world. Sophia, Victoria's voice cut through my contemplation as she entered the studio. The New York Times art critic is here. Are you ready? I nodded, straightening my paint-stained smock. I'd learned long ago not to dress up for critics. They expected artists to look a certain way, and authenticity sold better than polish. The interview went better than I could have hoped. The critic was particularly moved by Genesis of Abandonment, spending nearly an hour analyzing its layers of meaning. When the article came out the next day, it was everything Victoria had hoped for and more. Rising star Sophia Blackwood brings raw emotion to canvas. The headline read, "Her work speaks to the universal experience of rejection while transforming personal pain into transcendent beauty." The centerpiece of her upcoming exhibition, a triptych valued at $4 million, is already being hailed as a masterpiece of contemporary art. The morning of the opening, Victoria called in a panic. "Sophia, you need to know something. Your parents RSVP for tonight." My hand froze on my coffee cup. "What?" "They called the gallery this morning. Apparently, your father's law firm represents one of our major collectors, and they saw the Times article." She paused. Should I have security turn them away? I thought about it for a long moment. "No," I finally said. "Let them come. It's time they saw exactly what their artistic delusion has become." That evening, I stood in the packed gallery, watching as New York's elite art collectors and critics moved through the space. The exhibition was titled Price of Rejection, a deliberate double meaning that hadn't been lost on anyone. I was discussing the techniques used in one of my smaller pieces with a collector when I heard the familiar voice that still haunted my dreams. "Sophia." I turned to find my parents standing there, looking exactly as I remembered, yet somehow smaller. My father wore his best suit, the one reserved for important court cases. My mother was dressed in Chanel, her pearls gleaming under the gallery lights. Behind them stood my sister Lily, who had tears in her eyes. "Mother. Father." My voice was steady, professional. "Welcome to my exhibition." My father's eyes darted around the room, taking in the red dots next to most pieces, indicating they were already sold. The prices listed would have been unthinkable to him 5 years ago. "Your work," my mother began, then stopped, seemingly at a loss for words. "It's different than what we expected." I raised an eyebrow. "What did you expect? Finger paintings?" Before they could respond, Victoria appeared at my side. "Sophia, darling, the Guggenheim curator would like to discuss acquiring Genesis of Abandonment for their permanent collection. They're offering $4.5 million. I saw my father's jaw drop, and for the first time in my life, he seemed genuinely speechless. "Tell them I'll consider it," I said calmly. "But remind them that the Museum of Modern Art is also interested." Victoria nodded and disappeared into the crowd. My father cleared his throat. "Sophia, perhaps we could talk privately. Your mother and I, we may have been hasty in our judgment." I looked at them, really looked at them, and saw what they couldn't say. They hadn't come because they were proud of me or because they regretted their actions. They'd come because I was now successful enough to be worth acknowledging. I'm afraid I don't have time for a private conversation, I said coolly. I have collectors waiting, but feel free to enjoy the exhibition. The piece over there, I pointed to the Last Supper of the Disowned, which I brought from Florence, might particularly interest you. It's about a family that valued status over love. It sold for $2 million last week. My mother's face crumpled. Sophie, please. We're still your parents. No, I said firmly. You gave up that right when you gave me an hour to pack my life away. My art, the very thing you rejected me for, has made me more successful than you ever imagined. But success isn't why you were wrong. You were wrong because you chose your expectations over your daughter's happiness. Lily stepped forward then, pulling something from her purse. It was a crumpled piece of paper, a drawing I'd done of her when we were children. I kept this, she said softly. I always believed in you, Sophie. I felt tears prick my eyes but held them back. This was not the moment for emotional reconciliation. Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood, Victoria had returned. I hate to interrupt, but the mayor has arrived and specifically requested to meet the artist. I turned to my family. Thank you for coming. The exhibition runs for 6 weeks if you'd like to return. Though most pieces are already sold, you can still look at them. That's free. As I walked away, I heard my father call out, Sophia, wait. But I kept walking. 5 years ago, they forced me to choose between my art and my family. They never expected I'd succeed at the former. And now they wanted to pretend the latter hadn't been destroyed by their own actions. Later that night, after the last guest had left and the gallery was quiet, I stood before Genesis of Abandonment. The triptych told my story. The first panel showing the moment of rejection. The second depicting the struggle and pain of building myself back up, and the third revealing the emergence of success and self-acceptance. Victoria joined me, champagne glasses in hand. Your family left this for you, she said, handing me an envelope along with the champagne. Inside was a check for $50,000, the amount they'd planned to contribute to my law school education, and a note that read, "We were wrong. We're sorry." I took out my phone and snapped a photo of the check. Then, I carefully tore it into pieces and let them flutter into the gallery's elegant wastebasket. Tell them, I said to Victoria, that my art is no longer for sale, at any price. The next morning, I started a new painting. This one wasn't about rejection or pain or vindication. It was about freedom. The freedom to choose your own path, to define your own success, to decide who deserves a place in your life. I titled it The Price of Freedom and never put it up for sale. It hangs in my private studio now, a reminder that sometimes the biggest triumph isn't proving others wrong. It's proving yourself right. The art world continues to clamor for my work, with pieces regularly selling for millions. My parents occasionally send messages through Lily, asking to be part of my life again. Maybe someday I'll be ready for that conversation. But for now, I'm content knowing that my artistic delusion turned out to be worth far more than any law degree could have been, not just in dollars, but in the priceless currency of personal truth. After all, success isn't just about proving your critics wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you were right all along. I adjusted my designer's suit in the mirror of the elevator as it climbed to the top floor of Sterling Industries headquarters. The Italian silk felt foreign against my skin, a far cry from the rough cotton uniform I'd worn in this same elevator 7 years ago. Back then, I was just Miguel Santos, the night janitor who cleaned these halls after everyone had gone home. Now I was Miguel Santos, CEO of Phoenix Ventures, about to attend Sterling Industries' annual corporate gala. The irony wasn't lost on me. The elevator doors opened to reveal a transformed penthouse office space. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the crowd of executives in their finest attire. The air hummed with classical music and pretentious conversation about golf courses and summer homes. Your invitation, sir? A young woman at the entrance asked politely. I handed her my embossed invitation, watching her eyes widen slightly at the Phoenix Ventures logo. Our company had been making waves in the business world lately, though few knew who actually owned it. Welcome, Mr. Santos, she said, her tone notably more respectful. Mr. Sterling has been expecting you. Of course he had. William Sterling Ili, CEO of Sterling Industries, had been trying to arrange a meeting with Phoenix Ventures' mysterious CEO for months. What he didn't know was that we'd met before, usually when I was emptying his trash can late at night while he ignored my existence. I made my way through the crowd, picking up snippets of conversation. The company's stock was down. Profit margins were shrinking. Rumors of a hostile takeover were spreading. I smiled to myself, knowing just how true those rumors were. Miguel? Miguel Santos? Is that really you? I turned to find Linda from HR staring at me in disbelief. She had always been one of the few who actually bothered to learn my name during my janitor days. Hello, Linda. I smiled warmly. It's been a while. I'll say, when you left, I thought, well, we all assumed you'd taken another custodial position somewhere else. Life had different plans, I replied simply. Before she could ask more questions, a hush fell over the crowd. William Sterling Eli had arrived, commanding attention as he always did. He was shorter than I remembered, or maybe I just stood taller these days. Welcome, everyone. His voice boomed across the room. Sterling Industries has been a pillar of excellence for 3 generations, and tonight we celebrate another year of success. The slight pause before success was telling. Sterling Industries was in trouble, and everyone knew it. That's why I was here. Sterling worked the room like the seasoned CEO he was, shaking hands and laughing at jokes that weren't funny. When he reached me, Linda made the introduction. Mr. Sterling, this is Miguel Santos from Phoenix Ventures. Sterling's perfectly practiced smile didn't waver, but his eyes narrowed slightly. Santos, that name sounds familiar. It should, I replied calmly. I worked here for 5 years. Oh, he took a sip of his champagne. In which department? Maintenance. I was your night janitor. The champagne caught in his throat. Several nearby conversations stopped as people turned to stare. Sterling's face flushed red, whether from embarrassment or anger, I couldn't tell. A janitor. He forced a laugh. Well, isn't that interesting? And now you're what? An assistant at Phoenix Ventures? Actually, I'm still cleaning floors. He cut me off, his voice dripping with condescension. Though I suppose the corporate world could be considered a step up from bathroom duty. The surrounding executives chuckled nervously. Sterling was known for his cruel humor, especially when he felt threatened. I'd witnessed it countless times while quietly cleaning his office late at night. I smiled, remembering all those nights I'd spent studying business textbooks between cleaning tasks, taking online courses while on my breaks, and carefully observing how this company was run, or rather, misrun. You know, Mr. Sterling, I said quietly, I learned a lot while cleaning these floors. For instance, I learned that your company's profit margins have been declining for the past 5 years. That your attempted expansion into Asian markets was a costly failure. That your own board members have been quietly selling their shares. The color drained from his face. These were things only someone with intimate knowledge of the company would know. Things I had discovered during countless nights of cleaning offices, emptying trash bins filled with confidential documents, and overhearing late-night conversations while invisible in my janitor's uniform. Who exactly are you? Sterling demanded, his voice losing its smooth confidence. Tomorrow morning, I'll be joining your board meeting. I replied, setting down my untouched champagne. I think it's time we discuss the future of Sterling Industries. His eyes widened as realization dawned. You're the CEO of Phoenix Ventures. Times change, Mr. Sterling. Sometimes the guy cleaning your floors today might be buying your company tomorrow. I turned and walked away, leaving him sputtering behind me. As I waited for the elevator, I could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on my back, the whispers already starting to spread through the party. The same elevator attendant who had ignored me for years now straightened up and gave me a respectful nod. Good evening, Mr. Santos. Good evening, Thomas, I replied, using his name just as I had when I was a janitor. He looked surprised that I remembered it. As the elevator descended, I thought about tomorrow's board meeting. In my briefcase were documents that would change everything. Proof of Sterling's mismanagement, details of the company's vulnerability, and most importantly, evidence of Phoenix Ventures' controlling interest in Sterling Industries. Tomorrow, William Sterling II would learn what it felt like to be invisible. But first, I had one more stop to make. Before heading home at night, I drove to a small apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. The building wasn't much to look at, but it held a special place in my heart. 7 years ago, I lived in Unit 4B, studying by candlelight when I couldn't afford electricity. Now, I owned the entire building, and my old apartment was home to another night janitor, a young woman named Sophia who reminded me of myself. She was working her way through business school, just as I had. Mr. Santos, Sophia exclaimed when she opened the door. I wasn't expecting you tonight. Just checking in. I smiled, handing her a thick envelope. Your tuition for next semester, and please, it's still Miguel. Her eyes welled up with tears. I don't know how to thank you. Just promise me one thing, I said. When you make it to the top, remember what it was like at the bottom. Back in my penthouse apartment, I spent hours reviewing the documents for tomorrow's board meeting. The story they told was clear. Sterling Industries, once a titan of industry, had been hemorrhaging money for years under William Sterling IA's leadership. While he'd been hosting lavish parties and buying private islands, the company had been dying a slow death. The only reason it hadn't collapsed entirely was because of the dedicated middle managers and workers who kept things running despite their CEO's incompetence. I knew because I'd been watching it all unfold, invisible in my janitor's uniform. The next morning, I arrived at Sterling Industries headquarters an hour early. The security guard did a double take when I walked through the main entrance rather than the service entrance I'd used for years. The boardroom was empty when I arrived, so I took the opportunity to walk around, remembering all the nights I'd spent cleaning this room. How many times had I wiped down this very table while dreaming of sitting at it? How many coffee stains had I scrubbed from this carpet while listening to earnings calls playing on my earbuds, teaching myself about corporate finance? Gradually, board members began to arrive. Most ignored me, assuming I was part of the support staff. A few gave me curious glances, probably wondering about the rumors from last night's party. William Sterling II was the last to enter, 15 minutes late as usual. He stopped short when he saw me sitting in his chair at the head of the table. What is the meaning of this? He demanded, his face already turning red. Security. Please, Mr. Sterling, I said calmly. Take a seat. We have a lot to discuss. I will not be ordered around in my own boardroom by a janitor. One of the board members, an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen, cleared her throat. William, I believe you should sit down. Mr. Santos represents Phoenix Ventures, which now owns a controlling interest in Sterling Industries. Sterling's face went from red to white. That's impossible. We would have known. Would you? I opened my briefcase and began distributing documents. Your company's stock has been undervalued for years due to mismanagement. Phoenix Ventures has been quietly acquiring shares through various subsidiaries for the past 18 months. The board members began flipping through the papers, their expressions growing increasingly grave. As you can see, I continued, Phoenix Ventures now owns 51% of Sterling Industries. We also hold a significant portion of your company's debt, which you've been struggling to service. Sterling collapsed into a chair, his carefully maintained facade crumbling. How did you do this? I learned everything I needed to know about this company while cleaning its floors, I replied. I saw the warning signs years ago, the declining profits, the failed projects, the growing debt. While you were busy holding parties and buying yachts, I was building my own company, preparing for this moment. I stood up and began walking around the table, just as Sterling had done countless times while I cleaned around him. Did you know that every night your cleaning staff has to empty 3 different trash bins in your office because you can't be bothered to use just one? That you've gone through 4 different executive assistants this year alone because of your temper? That your own employees have a betting pool on when the company will go bankrupt? The board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. These were things everyone knew but no one discussed. The night cleaning staff sees everything, I continued. We're invisible to people like you, which makes us the perfect observers. We know who stays late to actually get work done. We know who treats people with respect regardless of their position. We know who's really keeping this company alive. I pulled out another set of documents, which is why I've prepared a comprehensive restructuring plan. Sterling Industries doesn't need to fail. It just needs proper leadership. For the next hour, I outlined my plan for the company. The board members listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and taking notes. Sterling sat in silence, his world crumbling around him. This is outrageous, he finally exploded. I am William Sterling II. This company bears my name. The company bears your grandfather's name, I corrected him. A man who built it from nothing, just like I built Phoenix Ventures. You inherited everything and nearly destroyed it. Mrs. Chen spoke up. I moved to vote on the restructuring plan and the proposed change in leadership. One by one, the board members voted. The result was unanimous, except for Sterling's vote, which no longer mattered anyway. "You can't do this to me," Sterling whispered, his voice breaking. "This company is all I have." "No, Mr. Sterling, this company is all you had. While you were busy looking down on people like me, you forgot the most important lesson in business. Respect everyone, because you never know who they might become." Security arrived to escort Sterling from the building. As he passed me, he paused. "I don't understand. You were just a janitor." "There's no such thing as just a janitor, Mr. Sterling. Every person has value, whether they're cleaning floors or running companies. You might have learned that if you'd ever bothered to learn my name." After he left, I turned to address the board. "Now let's talk about the future of Sterling Industries. First order of business. We're establishing an education fund for all employees, from maintenance staff to executives. Everyone deserves a chance to grow." The transformation of Sterling Industries began immediately. We cut excessive executive perks and redirected the money into employee development programs. We promoted people based on merit rather than connections. We made sure every employee, regardless of position, was treated with respect. 6 months later, I stood in my old custodial closet, now being converted into a small break room for the maintenance staff. The mop and bucket I'd used for 5 years were still there. "Should we throw these out?" Sophia asked. She'd recently graduated and was now working in our finance department, though she still helped clean occasionally to support her replacement. "No," I replied. "Let's keep them as a reminder. Success isn't about where you start, it's about how hard you're willing to work to reach your dreams." William Sterling IE now works as a consultant for small businesses. Last I heard, he's learning some valuable lessons about humility. His grandfather's company, now called Phoenix Sterling Industries, is thriving under new leadership that understands the value of every employee. As for me, I still visit the night cleaning staff regularly. I know all their names, their stories, their dreams. 3 of them are currently in college, supported by our employee education program. 2 more are taking coding classes. 1 is working on a business plan. Yesterday, I received an invitation to speak at business school about my journey from janitor to CEO. The topic they suggested was the extraordinary rise of Miguel Santos. But I plan to talk about something else. There's no such thing as an ordinary job. Whether you're cleaning floors or running companies, success comes from respecting others and believing in yourself. Sometimes the person you ignore today might be signing your severance package tomorrow. Every morning, I keep my old janitor's uniform hanging in my office as a reminder, not of where I came from, but of all the invisible people who keep our world running while others look right through them. And every night, before I leave the office, I make sure to clean my own trash bin and leave a thank you note for the cleaning staff. Because I remember what it was like to be invisible, and I promised myself I would never let anyone else feel that way in my company. The story of how I bought Sterling Industries made headlines in the business world. Some called it a brilliant strategic takeover. Others called it poetic justice. But for me, it was simply fulfilling a promise I made to myself years ago while scrubbing floors. Success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. Last week, I hired a new night janitor. During the interview, he mentioned he's taking online business classes. I smiled and shared a story about a young man who once cleaned these same floors while dreaming of something bigger. Then I handed him a key to the executive floor and said, "Dream big, work hard, and remember, there's no such thing as just a janitor." The look in his eyes reminded me of myself 7 years ago when I was invisible to everyone except myself. Sometimes that's all you need, to believe in yourself when no one else does. Now, when I walk through the halls of Phoenix Sterling Industries late at night, I make sure to stop and talk with every member of our cleaning staff. I know their names, their stories, their dreams. Because somewhere out there, another Miguel Santos is cleaning floors and dreaming of boardrooms. And this time, someone sees them.